Hello, Grand Archive players. Let's answer a rules question. What do copies of activations look like? This will be related to the rules update implemented in April 2026. At the current time, effects that copy card activations are not common in the card pool. On top of that, many of the corner cases of these rulings are unlikely to be relevant in an average game, so don't worry about them too much. Also, I'll be referring to card activations in this video, but the information should apply generally to other ways of playing cards, such as materializations and bestowments, and also to activated abilities. When a card activation is copied, the copy goes directly onto the stack and resolves separately from the original. The developer article conceptualizes this as having an instruction on the stack to resolve the card activation an additional time. Personally, I find it easier to think of it as a separate item on the stack that references the original. In any case, the activation copy is not independent of the original. Any information about the card activation is derived from whatever the original card activation was. In this way, the activation copy behaves like it has all the attributes of the original activation. This has some important ramifications. But before we talk about those, a few preemptive notes. The topic of this video is copying card activations that are already on the stack. It does not apply to effects such as Grim Prestige or Duchess 6 of Hearts, which create a copy in a zone outside the stack and then activate that copy. The functionality of these effects is fundamentally different from ones like Rai Manweaver and Stargazer's Portent. Note that activation copies are created directly on the stack rather than being put onto the stack, which means that costs do not need to be paid, and choices made during activation, such as modes and targets, are not made when copying activations. Compare the examples of copying a cremation ritual and copying a return to the archive. Copying the activation of a cremation ritual does not necessitate sacrificing an ally again, since this additional cost was already paid when it was originally activated. However, Return to the Archive sacrifices a regalia as part of its effect when it resolves, so the control of the copy would need to do that to a regalia they control if they want to recover and draw a card. Let's talk about some of those ramifications I mentioned earlier. Since the copy reads all the attributes of the original, properties that apply to the activation, such as imbued or prepared, apply to the copy. This is a major difference from how copies of objects or intents work, which involves creating a brand new item that does not inherit most properties or effects acting on the original. For example, if player B activates Surging Bolt imbued and is copied by player A's Rai Manweaver, the copy will see that the original is imbued and resolve as if it was imbued, dealing 3 damage rather than 2. By default, the copy will also have the same chosen modes and targets as the original, which is why most activation copy effects specifically state that they allow you to choose new targets. Due to referencing the original activation, a copied activation will also have unlocked any restriction abilities that were unlocked by the original. This can become relevant if the copy and the original are controlled by different players with different champions. For example, if player B's Rai Stormseer activates Stabilizing Capacitance at level 7, and player A's Rai Manweaver copied it, the level 7 plus restriction ability would be unlocked for A's activation copy despite him not being at that level. Note that restriction abilities check upon activation and are different from other kinds of level checks. If player B in our previous example activated Fireball, it would deal 8 damage assuming no other effects. If player A copied that Fireball, it would deal damage according to his controller's champion's level, which in this case is only level 3, for 4 damage. Copies can resolve with other information regarding the way the original card activation was activated, such as what costs were used to pay it, how it was activated, i.e. star calling, and if it was empowered and by how much. Again, returning to the example we just saw, if player B empowered 2 before activating Fireball, they would be activating at level 9 for 10 damage. Player A's copy would act at a base level of 3, but the activation would also be empowered by 2, dealing 6 damage. Also note that, much like copies of objects on the field, copies of card activations cease to exist once they leave their designated zone, in this case the stack, since the copies aren't represented by actual cards. A copied card activation cannot exist in a player's graveyard, memory, material deck, etc. However, if an activation copy of an object successfully resolves, that activation becomes a token object as it leaves the stack and enters the field. As an example, if player B activates UD Gossamer Jade and player A copies it with Rai Manweaver, the copied card activation resolves, creating a token Fantasia that enters the field as a fresh UD object. Note that since the copy was created on the stack rather than itself activated, player A doesn't need to go through any activation requirements such as element checks. The token UD on the field does have the ability to gain root counters as player A empowers, but the object on the field does not have the second ability, as that one is class restricted and does not function on the field for player A. Finally, this way of copying card activations allows for the potential to modify the original card activation and have any of those modifications carry over to the copy. Unfortunately, the only example we currently have of this is itself somewhat of a complicated card. Artist, Floodborn Deacon. If player B controls an artist and activates Liquidation, that Liquidation will have 2 instances of the Deluge ability to deal 7 damage, assuming B meets the Deluge requirement upon resolution. If player A's Rai Manaweaver copied this Liquidation, the copy would also have 2 instances of the Deluge ability, since the original had been granted an additional ability. Note that player A would need to meet this Deluge requirement themselves in order to deal any damage. If instead player A controlled an artist while player B did not, and A copied B's Liquidation, the copy of Liquidation will have only 1 instance of Deluge. This is because the original does not have the additional ability, and the copy does not have one either, since Artist only applies the extra ability to card activations if they were activated. Remember, Rai Manaweaver creates copies already on the stack. This copy is neither a card nor was it activated. Okay, that was quite a lot, but we aren't done yet. We haven't talked about negates. Negating a card activation with no other activations currently on the stack referencing it is the same as before the rules update, and works how you're accustomed to it working. That is, the card activation will be sent to the graveyard or whatever zone is appropriate upon being negated. However, if there is a pending reference to the negated activation still on the stack, negation may behave differently. Let's look at an example to see some different possible scenarios. Either player activates some mage spell. Player A activates the ability of Rai Manaweaver to copy it. Note that this ability uses a stack and must first resolve in order to create a copy. Let's say this ability resolves, the copy is created, and then player B activates Incapacitate to negate the copy. In this case, it's exactly what you would expect. The copy is removed from the stack, does not resolve, and the original is of course unaffected. What if instead the original was targeted by Incapacitate? When Incapacitate resolves, it negates the original spell. This negated card activation will have no effect when it tries to resolve. However, it will not be removed from the stack immediately. If there is a pending reference on the stack, in this case a copy activation, the negated activation will remain on the stack until it is no longer being referenced, i.e. when the copy resolves and leaves the stack. The copy will read all the necessary information from the negated original. Once no references remain, the original will leave the stack as a state-based check. Despite the complexity of this interaction, this scenario is vanishingly unlikely to happen. Because all the effects that copy activations are either triggers or activated abilities, which use the stack, if someone wants to negate the original to prevent the copy, they just respond to that trigger or activated ability to do so. If someone creates a copy in response to the negation, the copy would be created and resolved before the original becomes negated. In the previous example, there's no reason for player B to allow Rai's ability to resolve first instead of simply negating the original. Alternatively, if player B responds to the original by attempting to negate it, any copy effect activated in response would create and resolve the copy before the negate. I tried to come up with a scenario where it made any sense to allow the reference copy to be created first, then negate the original before the copy can resolve, but I couldn't. Maybe it's just a failure of creativity on my part. Anyway, moving on, there are other types of negates that also specifically move the negated card to another zone, such as to banishment. Does anything change in this situation? As with the previous scenario, let's say first the copy is created, then the original card becomes negated and then changes zones. What happens? Unlike in the previous scenario, the original activation was not just negated, but forcibly moved off the stack to another zone during the resolution of that negate. As a result, it cannot remain on the stack and cannot be referenced by any pending copies. The copy cannot reference any information from the original since it is no longer on the stack, and subsequently fails to resolve. As an additional wrinkle in this already corner case, note that, unlike negation under more typical circumstances, this causes the negated card activation to go directly from the stack to banishment, rather than touching its destination zone, usually the graveyard, first, during the resolution of the negate. I've discussed this behavior in my video about special resolution rules, but I think it's time to start wrapping things up. Let's summarize. When a card activation is copied, a reference to the original activation is created on the stack to resolve the original activation in additional time. This reference reads any attributes of the original activation, such as any properties, modes, targets, unlocked restriction abilities, and additional abilities. Upon resolution, the copied activation reads any relevant information of the copy's controller, who may or may not be the same player as the original. You can think of the copy as getting any information about how it was activated from the original's controller, but resolve using the information of the copies controller. If a card activation is negated while it has any currently pending references on the stack, it can remain on the stack for as long as it needs to be relevant. If the original card activation changes zones off the stack, the copy will be unable to reference the original activation and will fail to resolve. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.